Mr. Chairman, I move for consideration within general purpose school fund budget amendment, consideration of account number 76100-7007, building improvements, and account number 39,000 pertaining to the unassigned fund balance. Mr. Chairman, I so move.
Motion by Commissioner Metz, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner,
We're just gonna do this, I think, she's right there.
second by Commissioner
Gibson.
Gibson. Okay,
Will I list this resolution, since it is pulled out separately, would list this as resolution 2020-0612A?
Yeah.
yeah. I realize there's a lot of people here that's interested in what we're talking about right now, and most everybody here is wanting to say the same thing. So I would like if the people from volunteers would appoint you a spokesperson. And I think Coach Bob's here from Cherokee, or he was. And I'm sure Superintendent Hickson, you may want to speak on it also. So, you know, we would recognize someone from volunteer right now that wishes to speak.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Flood, volunteer wants to take
State your name.
April Hill.
April.
Yes, I've talked to some of you on the phone Thursday. First time I've ever called a commissioner ever. I think the boys, our field is not playable on. Our boys will not get to play football this year if you all don't pass it. We will have to travel to away games. Who's gonna pay for that? Is the football teams going to have to pay for the buses and all that? It is not fair for our team not to get to play. The band won't get to have shows or anything because they depend on the concession money. They done lost the Fun Fest. It depends on them getting to have concession stand. I have senior boys, please stand up. Is it fair for them not to have senior night on their home field?
Stand up.
They make their grades. They do what they need to do to play football. My son plays football. His lowest grade's a 99. I can vouch for that. We got football players all out in the hall. Soccer players, band members, everybody for this turf. All the community up in Churchill, you know, for our students, their education, it's worth it for them. They're our future. You all played on your home school. When you played football, if you played, these boys deserve that opportunity as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions for Ms. Hill from the commission? If not, Coach Ball, you still here? I'll let you address the commission about you know, I think it's turf is something that's very important for most schools. I think it's something that's very needed. Put a lot of time into it, and a lot of people, Cherokee has put a lot of time into it. Not just me, but it's, you know, today I spent 3 hours there. It's a dead period, you're not supposed to be there, but I was there. The turf, that's something that's more time for my family, more time for our coaches' families, and everyone else that puts time into it. There's no opposition on whether volunteers should get it or not. I think they should. Thought that for 4 years now. And, you know, we do take a lot of pride and care into our field, and, you know, had a lot of people just made it that way, and gonna try to continue that. And, you know, to me, I think it's something that's gonna benefit a whole lot of students, a lot more than just football. You're looking at both soccer teams, you're looking at baseball and softball in the spring when they get rained out of their field. You're looking at ROTC, PE, your feeder schools. There are just so many endless opportunities that can be taken care of on that field. And, you know, I think it's something that needs to happen on both ends of the county. And, you know, I just look at so many different avenues that can be used. You can bring in teams to have tournaments, whether it's soccer, whether it's 7-on-7 in football, band competitions, and you're not worried about the field being destroyed. The programs, the football programs, the booster clubs, the schools that put a lot of money into it as well to maintain it. And, you know, I think it's a huge benefit. It's gonna reach a lot more students than you realize. And, you know, I think it's very important.
Thank you, Coach Bob. Hold on just one second. Mr. Pat, you have a question for Coach Bob?
You're responsible for that field, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And what do you use local students for the maintenance of it, or how do you?
I try not to do that if I can, as far as maintenance of the field for the students. I mean, when we paint our field when we add that stuff to it for games, yeah, we'll let the kids fill in the lines and stuff like that. But as far as, you know, replacing sprinkler heads and fixing irrigation and replacing sod and doing stuff like that, for the most part, that's done by coaches and myself. You know, 2 years in a row, we put down over 2,000 square feet of sod on our field 2 summers in a row. And we did use that as a summer workout and had kids help carry pieces of sod and stuff just for that purpose. But without those extra hands, we couldn't have done it. And, you know, if there's any issues, usually we try not to ask for a whole lot of help. We try to take care of it ourselves and just move on. And, you know, we're not waiting for a lot of help.
So how did your field get in such bad shape?
My field is not in bad shape, honestly, but
I understand you're in bad shape. That came from some of your parents.
You talking about volunteer or church?
Yeah, volunteer.
no, I'm serious.
I'm so sorry.
No, our field is not in bad
Yes,
shape.
Cherokee's man.
I mean, I'll try to keep it as much like looking like a golf course as I can, so.
I'd like to talk to volunteers.
I don't think they're here as far as coaching staff.
Commissioner Gibson, you want to?
Yeah, I'd like to add one more thing. When he was talking about the volunteers football field, a lot of people don't remember this, but I was on the original staff that started coaching at volunteer. When they put that field in, there was a huge cavern under that field. And they had to fill it in, I forgot how many tons of rock, and that thing keeps settling probably. And that's what causes a lot of the issue on that field up there. It was, like I said, I don't remember how much rock they had to put in, but they had to do a whole lot of filling on that field up there. And it's been a nightmare ever since that field was built, of keeping it in some type of playing condition. So that's, again, just a little more information, because, you know, it's one of the things, I was there when that all happened. I'm not that old.
Greg Dixon, would you like to address this?
A couple of things. There's obviously 1.25, not to exceed 1.25 million is a lot of money. All of the adults in the room, whether they're from volunteer or Cherokee, would agree that that's a lot of money. It's a lot of burden on the taxpayers. One of our biggest jobs is to make sure we're fiscally solvent, that we're fiscally responsible, and that we spend money in a conservative manner. But along with that, we also have a responsibility to keep kids safe and our staff safe, and in this case, it is our students who are playing football. Let me address the volunteer high school field. It has been a long time coming. It is not a coach's fault for the field condition. It's not a staff fault for the staff or for the field condition. As Mr. Gibson stated a couple minutes ago, he was accurate. This is an ongoing process due to the sublayers under that field. It is believed that the drainage had been collapsed for many years prior to me coming. We did look at that this last year, and as I'm reminded every single year since I moved here, we've had abnormal amounts of rain. Those water issues have destroyed that field. We have dug up those pipes. We have replaced all of those drains with bigger non-corrugated metal drains. They are PVC, they're plastic, they're set at the right level, at the right pitch, and they're the right diameter to evacuate the water if we go with turf, if it's approved this evening. If it's not, we will need more time to rectify that situation, but either way, those foundational problems have been resolved at the volunteer in the meaning that the drains have been rectified. back to the money issue. I know this is a big responsibility, and I know that it's uncomfortable to discuss that amount of money being amended to a current year budget. We're not at July 1 yet. This is an amendment to the 1920 budget for the school system. We have already met as a committee with a committee from both Cherokee's area and Volunteers area, and they are hard at work in drumming up support, financial support for this project, which would benefit the entire county. It would be my goal to limit or greatly reduce any draw from the local funds if this is approved this evening, and that work has already started. I couldn't tell you what we're looking at, but prior to this discussion and this board action about a year ago, we had several vendors totaling up to $500,000 ready to sign if the board would have taken action. It is my belief that we're going to see a large amount of this paid for from companies and from industry that support our schools and support our students. I've shared with each of you that our CTE program is gaining leaps and bounds, and our industry is excited to see our students in the room. A trade-off to that is that they reinvest in the school system so that we can keep the kids engaged, whether it's in sports or other activities. The last thing I want to say is the group that's in this room tonight represents Hawkins County. It's not a Cherokee versus volunteer issue. One of the biggest things that I've tried since I've come here is to get rid of the upper versus lower or the volunteer versus Cherokee. There's healthy competition that goes on when we meet on a playing field. When we're not on a playing field, we're all educating Hawkins County students to be the best they can be after high school. Whether they go to the career, the military, college, post-secondary opportunities abound, and it's our job to make sure they're successful. One of those avenues is through sports. And I think if we offer sports, we ought to have the best facilities and the safest facilities for those students to use them. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Joyce.
All right, I've got a couple of questions, maybe more than two. And first of all, I'm a little concerned at the time we're dealing with. We're dealing with a pandemic. We all know that. We all know we possibly have shortfalls here and there. What happens if we find out we can have a football season and we spent $1,250,000 on a football season? And have you gotten any of those supporters yet? Have you, like, actually pulled in any of those supporters yet? And why did it take so long for everybody to come into action? Apparently this field problem's been some time now. And I'm just concerned as to why this happened now and it didn't happen a year back. And I know you've not been around very long, Matt, but I'm asking the parents also.
Well, I'd like to address, and then if I missed the mark, somebody can correct me, but Mrs. Goins, first question in reverse order. We started this immediately after the football season this year because we were able to make, if you remember the talks in the fall, when it was deemed unsafe, we had to get a crew out there, get it up to speed, and a lot of that was the drainage, because water's sitting on that field in low spots where it wouldn't be drained off. The drains were clogged, they weren't evacuating the water. Sitting water on top of what Mr. Gibson described, rock underneath with the soil on top, is going to cause a whole lot of issues, a lot of pitting, a lot of divots, a lot of uneven turf. So we did start weather permitting as soon as we could this year, and that was all of that drain work, and that took tremendously a long amount of time due to the rains that we had even this spring. Couple on top of that, the COVID closures. We closed and our staff were kept home for a period of time. That set us back, and again, none of these are excuses, it's just facts that we're dealing with. The timeline is unfortunate. It's not perfect timing. Perfect timing would have been that we were discussing this several months earlier, but we honestly had started a crew up there that we're going to reseed, and fertilize that with the hopes to have it done by the fall, because we were heading toward grass, and that was an internal effort. But again, the drainage, the inability to get on there and to finish that, open trenches, that all provided a stopping point for that work to continue. So that did lead to where we're at now and the board taking action when they did.
Another problem I have is the teachers' raises were cut completely out. And I feel this sends a signal that we're more interested in our football fields than we are in our teachers' salaries. And being a parent of 2 teachers, I know how much they spend out of pocket every year. It's a lot.
To that end, I want to go on record to say that we do not prioritize sports over academics. We don't prioritize sports over teacher salaries and taking care of our staff. At the last board meeting, when we sent our revised budget reflective of the -2% that the governor had promised, that was pulled back. Basically a flat funded budget with the exception of step increases for teachers. So those moving up in year increments off the salary schedule or unit increments on college courses, those types of things, those are still moving forward. But as far as raises across the board, we are not moving forward with that until we see our actuals from 1920 later this fall. And I did recommend to the board, our school board, that we would look at least a one-time bonus or a pay structure, an informal temporary pay structure to reflect this year's, just to see what the state income and the state revenues look like, because word on the street is that a lot of those state departments are being asked to cut. And if they're being asked to cut, that trickles down to our school systems across the state. And if that happens, we need to be prepared. To that end, you have not seen any teacher postings fly or be advertised on our website because we are filling our vacancies through attrition with current staff. So we are moving teachers when there's openings. We're moving appropriate credentialed teachers to those openings in-house until we get to the point where we're at or below that BDP funded formulas per student to teacher ratio. To this point, we've saved 10 positions, which equates to about a $500,000 reduction in year-to-date salary expenses, which will be reflected hopefully in the upcoming amendment. So we're doing our part on the operational costs. Another elephant in the room is that we're trying to equalize spending across the system, and one of those board actions is looking at locally funded resources or schools that fall outside the DEP funding formula, and we are looking at closing 2 rural small schools, and that's not an easy decision either. But it's also a business decision, and like I started our conversation this evening, one of my jobs is to make sure that we're fiscally solvent and responsible with our taxpayer money.
That's my job as well.
Correct. And it is everybody's job here, and I don't minimize that. What I will say is that if it passes, what I would tell you is that it is the work's already started to make sure that through donations, advertisements, tax-free purchase of those materials, because we can purchase those directly because we're a tax-free organization, we can save $25,000 to $27,000 right off the top by direct purchase of those materials. So there's things we can do if this passes to minimize that burden. The board thought it was very, very safe to assume that we would not exceed 1.25. We think that it's going to come in far lower than that. And whatever we do spend, my goal would be to greatly reduce, if not zero out the cost for our local expenditure.
And what will our estimated amount that we'll have to take out of fund balance for the coming year?
In the current budget before you, or that will be before you, it's estimated to 4.2. Last year was 3.3, the year before that was 3.1. Now, actuals, what we pulled 2 years ago, we estimated 3.1 and we drew $700,000. So we overestimate our expenditures and underestimate our revenues so that we come in a safe margin, because I don't want to stand before my board or any of you and tell you that we blew our budget to pot. So we're going to be very conservative with that budget.
And also, as you can tell, I've thought about this for days. I mean, it's very important. Also, now, if we're going to be saying do volunteer first, and then Cherokee down the road, of course, we know that Cody keeps his field in immaculate condition.
Correct.
How many years down the road, and will that money be just left there until we use it, or how does that work?
The money you see before you would cover both projects, so our goal would be is immediately following the football season in 2021, we would start work on Cherokee, assuming that we were able to complete volunteers on target this summer.
And this is probably a question for the volunteer boosters maybe. How much money would we lose if we don't have a home football season?
Oh, well,
I'm the volunteer band treasurer, so I can tell you that off of concessions alone, we make about $8,000 to $9,000 a year. We've already lost Fun Fest, that's $10,000 to $15,000 off of our budget. It costs us about that much just to get on the field with the show. The music, the copyright, instruction, uniforms, flags, all those things. We don't put on the shows with the elaborate stuff like you do. But we still do very well in competitions.
Okay, so total, how much would you say per season with all the ticket sales?
We don't get
we don't
ticket
ticket
sales.
sales.
That goes to the.
Only thing we
school.
do is, parking and, our little Falcons Nest thing, so,
Oh, okay.
yeah, that's all we get.
And how much is that?
I'll give it probably for 5 games, you're looking at $1,000 maybe.
Possibly could the kids do fundraisers to help raise extra money to pay for this and fund back to the Board of Education? Is that a possibility?
Fundraisers for the turf project?
Yes.
It is a possibility. You're talking about a very large amount of money, and I think that the efforts that the Booster Club committees that represent both ends of the county, I think that work would be more beneficial toward that end because of that large amount of money. But we would look at everything to generate those funds necessary to answer your question.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Fields.
Yeah, Director Hickson, I got a couple of questions, comments, whatever. First, I don't know if you were up on Volunteers Field when Dr. Samples, he's a turf grass expert, and you know what his ideal was. You know how much his estimate was to fix Volunteers Field versus putting this down to get it in very good playing condition. You got the figure?
I don't have that figure, but it was significantly less than the $240,000 that we had.
It was $35,000 is
yeah.
what Dr. Samples said. The field would be fixed and in perfect condition for $35,000.
That
I don't know. I'm just asking.
No, and I will clarify that was before our rain, and that was before the drain estimates were taken into consideration. That was just leveling the field and planting the sprigs and fertilizing appropriately for the upcoming fall season.
So if we did that just for this year to get us past what's going on in the economy right now, would that not buy us some time?
I don't think in our estimates and talking to the contractors we've dealt with, I don't think we have enough time, given the condition of the field, for turning it back to grass. It's a weed pit right now due to the digging up of those trenches for the drains. Those are ready to be backfilled. We're ready to move forward with it, but again, if the commission declines this evening, I will take every option back to my board, back to our board, and we will work every option that we can. It's our responsibility to do so.
The other question I had, some of our commissioners had made comments, and I've said this before too in the past, that your money's your money. Y'all get your budget, it's yours, you do what you want to do with it. That'd be a correct statement.
That's correct. Once it's earmarked for education, it's in our general fund or fund balance.
So if it's your money, I need you to explain to the public what we're looking at as commissioners. If we turn you down, why you still not gonna do it since it's your money?
Because amendments based on board policy and state law do have to come before the funding body, and you are the funding body.
I understand that, but I
We
just
can
want to
take
make sure the
action.
public knows that.
We can take an action as far as the Board of Education, but we are responsible for bringing any amendment and any expenditure that deviates from an approved budget to the funding body for reapproval. That goes with a new budget at the start of the year. That goes for amendments during the course of the year, because there needs to be transparency and oversight. You guys represent that transparency and oversight.
I agree. And the reason I asked the question is, and I'd like to know, if we did shoot it down, if you got turned down by the county commission, would you guys go ahead? I can't remember, I really do not remember the elevator thing. But I think it was voted down, they went ahead and done it. So will you guys go ahead if we shoot it down? Will you go ahead with the fields, turf grass on the fields?
That's something I would take back to the board for decision. I couldn't answer that question this evening. What I would say relative to the elevator discussion is that was an ADA compliance issue as well. And when you deal with,
Also, with the elevator, there was already money in that line item too, and so rather than doing other things that we had planned on doing, we did the elevator instead because it had to be done for ADA. So that's the only reason the elevator could go ahead and be done is because there was already money in the line item.
I'm just trying to make reference, just making sure that everybody, I'm just making sure, I want the public to be aware too, that, it's not always on us. It's not always a county commission decision that, prohibits or, goes ahead or lags behind anything that the school does.
I agree.
Go ahead.
That's all. I think your determination is correct. Unfortunately, we are going to, or fortunately, I think it is a good thing for transparency. I think it's a good thing for our public to know where we're at with our money. I think it's a good thing for them to hear what goes on with our funding body, our oversight body, and that is you guys as a commission. With that being said, I think that we need to, we will react responsibly no matter the decision before you, and I don't take the decision lightly. My board made a decision. I'm standing before you, relaying that decision and trying to answer the questions to the best of my ability as to why they felt compassion to do so and make that decision.
I appreciate it, mate. You've done a good job from what I hear and what I know. You did walk into a couple of rainy seasons. It's been pretty bad, but what I hear from other people say, teachers and work good meet and everything else, you've done an excellent job coming in. You got the hard job done, what you're doing, man.
Commissioner Barrett, did you withdraw? Or you need to still?
No, I've got some questions. Okay, Mr. Hickson, and this kind of goes along with, questions that Commissioner Goins had. You alluded, unless I've understood you correctly, about maybe having some, corporate sponsors. Okay, kind of like Commissioner Goins, I would feel better if you had something on paper, okay? Economic climate, corporations may be subject to change the mind.
Can I just, not to interrupt you, Mr. Barrett, but, those that were approached last year were apprehensive to sign any kind of contract that Mr. Castle at the time was a promissory note, or if conditions are met, if the board takes action, I promise to donate X, whatever the case is. They were apprehensive to do so because the board hadn't taken action. Now that the board's taken action, they know that it is a serious decision that they've prioritized and that they're willing to move forward to and put the money where it needs to be in order for that project to happen. That allows vendors and corporate sponsors to come along board and say, I feel a lot better turning over my donation to the school system because the board has dedicated those funds out of the reserve in order to pay for such a project. Now again, I know it's a lot of money, but my goal would be that if it's passed this evening to greatly lessen or zero out the cost of the school system by way of those donations and those sponsorships.
Okay.
But I do agree with your premise. I mean, it would make me feel a lot better, and I think it'd make everybody feel a lot better in the room if we had the money up front. Unfortunately, big corporations aren't always likely to sign on the line unless they know that the board's serious about moving forward with something.
Along those lines with the climate and stuff, economic climate, the virus, things like that. You're trying to predict the future. We are, basically. But, okay, we're not even sure, basically, if school will start this fall. Now, if you mix in social distance, and I don't know what school systems thought process is on this, but if you go in with social distance and you're running transportation and you're busing students, okay, the school bus, let's say, holds 70 people. If you're if you have to change that due to social distance, then you may potentially have to run 2 bus routes to pick up all the students. So you have the potential of having to double your transportation costs, wear and tear on the vehicles, probably double the pay for the bus drivers, everything like that. So it's a complicated mix. And we as commissioners, you know, we've got the turf issues facing us. We have, we saw a prime example here tonight of radio issues and EMS issues. You know, thank goodness we, you know, had people here. But all of that, we, as commissioners, you know, we had to figure out what to do. And it's tough spot to be in.
Yes, sir. Everything you stated is a factual concern that we're dealing with. First and foremost, we plan on opening as usual first part of August. And we're rolling out a plan the week of July 4th. Along those lines, we have contingencies if cases grow, if when we get into the flu season, those numbers tend to spike or increase to the point where it's deemed us unsafe. But we plan to open as usual, and part of that opening is being ready for sports that we can safely operate under the conditions that we hope to be in by the fall. We make plans on what if all the time because we have to be prepared. We can stand in front of any governing body, any group meeting, and what if ourselves to death because there's so many factors, especially with the pandemic coming in, that we can't determine a narrow focus or path that we're going to go on no matter what because we can't control those what ifs. I think the second thing is that the transportation concern is real. However, we've been surveying our parents. The last survey ended today, and over 60% of parents, because of concerns with busing, they do want schools open, but they are telling us that they are going to either have their students drive themselves or they're going to take their students through a carpool situation with siblings so that they're safer in their home groups or whatever their case is and not exposed to more than they need to be exposed to prior to getting to school. 60%. Now, will that play out to that 60%? I'm not sure, but we have gotten as much information to make informed and educated decisions in that planning process as much as possible. If we had to double the routes, I can tell you right now we couldn't do it. We have a hard time recruiting bus drivers. We have 100% full staff right now, but that doesn't mean that something could happen or that one of them gets sick, and we dealt with illnesses at the start of this year which were nearly catastrophic for having to double up on runs as it was. If we had to meet those CDC guidelines, I think to which you're referring, I can tell you right now we couldn't afford it or we couldn't meet those demands logistically right now. And I don't know any school system that can in our region because I'm on the phone with them every single week and they're all saying the same thing. Greene County, for example, Mr. McLean has said, we flat out couldn't do that if it got to that point, and I was right with them, we can't do that. So there needs to be contingencies. One of the acts that we're working on is the CARES Act. It was mentioned earlier, and that's $1.6 million for Hawkins County schools. One-time funds for 27 months that we have to dedicate a plan to. We have to dedicate a plan for opening, a plan for contingency should we have to scale back, and a plan for if we have to close. A large portion of that money is making sure that every single student, including those in this room, have a Chromebook, in this case, to take home that they can stream their teachers' lessons to and get the same type of instruction in their home. Is that the best case scenario? Absolutely not. We want students in school, in front of teachers, working with their hands, working with the teachers, learning directly from them. But we would be stupid if we didn't make those plans and contingencies according to what we think may happen. And when we get one-time dollars, we're going to maximize those to benefit us well into the future, not just this year.
Commissioner Claus.
I've got a grandson that's gonna be up there at volunteer in a year or so, and I don't know if he's gonna play football or not. He has in the past. I'm not a great fan of football. I think it's a dangerous sport, and I certainly don't encourage my grandson to play. However, as Mr. Gibson says, if you guys got the money in the budget, it's no new money. I could be persuaded to vote for it. However, tell me why, I'm gonna ask you 2 or 3 questions, okay? Why are you putting in turf over grass? And I've heard you discussion about the condition of the field. Can it be done in the fall? I guess the final question is, and it's not concerned with the football field. Why do all the teachers keep telling me that the education doesn't have money to buy supplies? They're asked to spend up to $300 to $400 a year for supplies for the classroom.
Each school site is given enough money to operate. Now that, I would have to get some details after the meeting from you perhaps and find out what classrooms those are and what school sites are affected, but every school site is given a budget for operational costs, and that includes classroom supplies. Now, teachers do go above and beyond. Teachers are naturally overachievers by nature, and that's why they're in the classroom. So they do come up with additional activities, additional resources they want to expose their students to, and in those cases, there may be some additional costs that aren't covered by the school site. But the school site budgets are there for that specific purpose. So again, if we can talk privately, I'd be happy to track down that information for you. Why turf? Turf is seen as an investment for the long term. As you heard Coach state earlier, it is a lot of maintenance. This gentleman to my left works extremely hard, and he and his staff do, as do volunteers. I was up at volunteer a week and a half ago, and following their morning practice, they were on mowers. Mr. Ball was on, and our coaches are on mowers and working those fields and striping and doing whatever they can if those fields are grass. Turf removes a lot of the maintenance costs. $7,000 on average for striping paint a year. That's a figure that I've been given from both sites. Time and effort in mowing, watering during the summer. Water bill is next to nothing if you go turf. Because unlike California, where I originally came from, you don't have to water turf. You have to water turf out there because it gets 110 degrees. You have to cool that down to plain temperature, ambient temperature for those students to survive and stay healthy out there. Advances in turf. Mr. Gibson is absolutely correct. Several years ago, there was a hot debate on which is safer. It's widely viewed as neutral or more leaning towards safer on the turf side now because of the synthetic materials they underline the turf with and the materials they're building the turf with these days, as far as cushioning and as far as that material staying put like natural grass does. I'm not an expert in that. All I can do is refer to the resources and the articles that are written and the scientists that do that work. But it's seen as a long-term investment, so why turf? If we invest in something that's going to last 10 years and reduce our maintenance costs each year annually, and we're able to set aside $50,000 that we typically run for sports field maintenance right now each year, by the end of 10 years, we have $500,000, and on average, it costs about $150 to replace turf once the preliminary work is done. So initially, it's a large expense, but it's an investment in what we can do long-term if done the right way. Third question was if we can get volunteers ready in time. The contractor we have ready to be lined up, who's on a Sourcewell contract, states that he can get that done prior to the start of the season. Worst case, if we get some more monsoons or rain weather type events and that delays it, we would be looking at some home games maybe played at the middle school to start the year, but we would have the bulk of the season for turf. So it is believed that we could have it ready.
I'm just aware that most baseball stadiums are put back to grass.
And there's a lot of athletes and teams that just like grass. If you get into the major leagues, people like it, especially the purists in baseball. They like the way the ball plays off the grass. It just depends on who you talk to. You're welcome.
Let me remind, let's make sure our questions are pertaining to this turf, and Director Hicks is going, he's will answer any of the questions we have about anything else at some other time. This meeting is beginning to get very lengthy, and we need to make sure that we're directing our questions towards the turf. And I would like to relinquish my chair to the chairman pro tem, Mr. Barrett, and I'd like to speak on this issue.
Charles, over the board.
And Mr.
Some of the questions I had has already been asked. And I'm for 100% children that are in school, grown up, high school, whatever, having a good playing field to play on. The calls that I got one that was all for it, the rest was opposed to it. The biggest reason was simply because of the money that's being spent. Both schools, when Cherokee at present time does not need, they've got a good field. Another thing was, at the end of this next fiscal year, those people reminded me that as far as they knew, 2 schools in Hawkins County were gonna be closed down in order to save money. Then you come along now, spending this money for tariff and spending it on one school that don't need it. That's questions I have.
Okay, fair enough, and I received those same questions, Mr. Thacker. I would say that Cherokee's doesn't need it right now. You're absolutely right. That's a factual statement from whoever you got a call from. It's a factual statement now. You've heard directly from the coach. I think that what we're looking at is an investment, like I said to Mr. Thacker Mr. Klontz a couple minutes ago, and that is that it's an investment in the long-term savings that we realize year after year.
What about the bids that
It's a Sourcewell contract which prevents us from having to bid it out because it meets the criteria in the state rubric for meeting those minimum price points and quality concerns that need to be universalized across the board. Closing schools is not an easy decision. If it were up to me, and I've said this publicly at my own board meetings, we'd keep those open. If we could afford to keep those open long-term, we would keep those open. I graduated from a high school that had less than 90 students. I see the value in small school education and what it means in relationships with students, teachers, and the communities that they serve. We have to make business decisions, whether it's right or wrong, or fair, or deemed right at the time. We also have a business to run because we use taxpayer money in order to prepare our kids for their futures. This investment would be used at Cherokee as well as Volunteer because of those ongoing costs. Operational costs are saved when you close 2 schools that are serving 160, 165 students between the 2 of them, and paying for 90% of those salaries outside of the BEP funding formula. Those ongoing costs can then be worked back into the system to benefit all teachers across the board and consequently all students across the board and not just pocketed here and there. Same thing goes for our sports. If we put the initial investment up front, we save those ongoing maintenance costs, and we set aside a fund of at least $50,000 a year, which I recommended when this motion was passed. We have enough to then replace that every 10 years on average when it needs to be replaced, and we have cash on hand to do so. So therefore, you're eliminating all those maintenance costs over the decade.
Well, we all know that this is an amendment to your budget.
It is.
And we also know that, you had this money, so, we know that you can spend it. That's not a problem.
And I don't want to put any of it, it's not my intent or the Board of Education intent to put anybody on the spot. And I know the predicament that this puts you in because of the transparency that our community demands and I think is good for our community. We have to be transparent in how we expend our dollars. We feel that it has to come up here because it's an amendment of 1.25 to the current year budget that you guys did not pass prior to the amendment being made. That's why we feel like it has to come forward.
Mr. Thacker, do you have any more questions? No. Commissioner Barker, I think you're next.
Yeah, man, I just got a couple of questions. I know that we've talked several times about drainage being the issue and you think you've got that problem. I guess the thing that concerns me is if, like Mr. Gibson said, that it's been established that there's cabins under anything. Have y'all core drilled, and what's gonna assure us that this is not, you know, we're gonna spend this money on turf, and then it's not gonna sink just like the field did? So,
There's no promise that once they take the first couple layers of dirt and fill off of that field, that they're not gonna run into issues. But with the studies that were done and with the work that was done from UT, it was largely believed that we could re-level that, seed it, and if we had the time to return it to natural turf. With that same rationale being used, and with the studies being done right now, we feel like the turf would provide the amount of work that they have to do for the base, and then the subsequent overfill would rectify those situations. But I'm not gonna make any promises, because there are some weird things that happen underneath the ground up in Volunteer.
that's kind of my concern, is, you know, what's the contingency plan if that happens? And it's my understanding the guy from UT did a visual, they didn't really do any engineering work or anything. So, do you not think that should be done before you go to that expense?
Part of what the contractor would do if this was passed is when they strip that down, is they look at and determine the needs of the base material, and that would include voids, rock layers, the amount of sandy, soft dirt that could collapse, that type of stuff, prior to putting fill on top. So that would be done as part of the process, and they build that cushion in when they give us those bids according to what the vendor has told us.
So what's your contingency plan if it's not suitable?
So our contingency plan is that if we're able to go back to school, we have a football season, and for whatever reason that football field is not ready, I have spoken to the middle school, and we will be working with the middle school to arrange for some home games to be played there, so that we can have some regional, local representation for home games and still allow for some fundraising. It's not the best. I know our parents and our students wouldn't want that, but our obligation is, if we offer the sport, to offer a playing field, and that's our obligation, and make sure that playing field is safe.
And then, I guess my other question, I've asked you this before, who's gonna be accountable to make sure that once this is all done, that it's maintained the way it should be maintained? Who's gonna do the training for that? Because, I mean, if you don't maintain it, it's gonna be back in the same position it is.
The contractor that puts the turf in does a professional development for our coaching staff and our athletic directors at each school site where it's installed. And they show the correct maintenance, how often. They create a schedule with us that's made known to the central office as well as each school site, and those are checked both by maintenance staff as well as central office and school site staff to make sure that those are accountable.
Okay, and then when staff changes, who's gonna do that continual training?
That's ongoing at the school site. That's an expectation of the administration at both schools.
Okay, any more questions, Commissioner Barker?
No, I'm finished.
Okay, Commissioner Brewer.
Thank you, Commissioner Byrd. I feel it's important that I need to speak, that's why I relinquished the chair. I would like to recognize again each and every football player from Volunteer this year tonight. If you just stand, or if you're standing, raise your hand.
They're out in the hall too.
You got your girls soccer team here too, Bob.
And the soccer, okay.
And the band.
All right, okay, and I didn't mean to overlook anybody. But listen, this is my point. If you vote no on this resolution tonight, you're saying, hey kids, you all don't matter no more.
Absolutely.
You don't matter. The contingency plan is to play at a middle school field. These seniors, I know, I can remember, and it's been a long time, but they're looking forward to their senior citizen. Senior season. And I know that they want to play on their home field. And, I ask this commission tonight, it's not, if you're worried about taking the heat, I mean, the board's done stepped up, the school board's done stepped up and said, we're going to do this. And all we're doing is just approving the amendment. And everybody that's called me that's been against this, I told them, you need to talk to your school board member. And I promise you that probably hopefully, and Judge Ross, he's taking a big hand into the fundraising and the boosters right now. And I think Matt's right. When everything's said and done, the taxpayer won't have to put any of this. I think that the money can be raised for this. But this is the thing about it. We cannot wait. If we don't do something now, then the fields are not going to, the field volunteers not going to be ready to play on or whatever. And I strongly support this amendment, and we need to step up and do the right thing.
Okay, I believe the board is clear as far as questions and things like that. So, I guess this time I will turn it back over to Mr. Brewer.
You gotta carry that.
I'll get carried out. Okay, all right. I guess we're ready to vote.
Chairman Barrett, we'll be doing this by voice, because we didn't have a way to set this on because they pulled it out, so we'll be doing it by voice vote.
Okay. Be a voice vote. The yes votes will be for
Bringing them in.
to be for. Okay, I'm getting myself mixed up now. Okay, will be for the amendment.
The resolution.
Or they pulled this one out.
Where they pulled it out. Okay, so
Yes, is for. Want to read it again?
so yes was
12A. And it's solely for account number 76-100-707 and 39,000. Just those two line items within that
The regular,
original budget.
regular capital outlay.
Okay, so the yes vote is to approve the amendment. The budget amendment. Okay. All right, is everybody clear on it? 'Cause I'm not sure I'm clear with that. Okay. Okay, Mr. Manager, would you repeat that right there?
If you are if you're supportive of turf, you're voting yes in support of turf at the two fields. If you disagree and do not want that budget amendment to go through for them to reallocate those funds, then you vote no.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, everybody ready to vote? All right, Madam Secretary, call the roll.
Commissioner Danny Alvis,
This is a tough one, I'll tell you. This, yes.
thank you. Nancy Barker. Yes. Jeff Barrett,
No.
Rick Brewer,
Yes.
George Bridwell,
Yes.
Larry Clontz,
Yes.
Linda Davis. Yes. Mark DeWitt,
Yes.
Bob Edens, you went home. Commissioner Edens, is that a yes? Thank you. Dawson Fields,
No.
Keith Gibson,
Yes.
Valerie Goins,
Sorry, but no.
Commissioner Harrell,
No.
Charles Housewright,
No.
Raymond Jesse,
Yes.
Tom Kern,
Yes.
John Metz,
Yes.
Hannah Speaks. No. Is that a no? I'm sorry. No. Donnie Talley,
No.
Charles Thacker,
No.
Sybil Trent. Yes. $13 yes.
Yes.